Hello and welcome to another live stream brought to you by Women's Health and Wellbeing Services. My name is Melanie Robson and I work here obviously. I'm a counselling psychologist by training and in my role here I do a few different things, not so much therapeutic work anymore, although I do run some groups, but I also do these live streams every week on a Wednesday. My focus is always on mental health issues and topics. We also have live streams that happen on a Friday weekly, run by Janet, who's our health promotion officer, and she focuses on, health promotion, more sort of physical health and as well as sort of mental well-being. So welcome back. Today's Wednesday, the 26th of August 2020. It's 11:30 in the morning here in Perth, Western Australia. It's a beautiful day, beautiful winter's day. We're actually getting up to some warmer weather already. A little touch of spring, which is just so wonderful. So every week, yes, I obviously talk about a different topic to do with mental health, and we're always open to any suggestions that you might have. We do have some courses and groups that run online as well. You're welcome to go to our website, whws.org.au, to check them out. Anyway, I might do all that kind of promo stuff at the end in case you're really keen to listen to what I have to say. And this being a live stream, obviously we're super keen to have interactions. If you happen to be watching this right now, 11:30 on a Wednesday morning, if not, of course, you can always watch this video back, which I love to do. I sign up for so many things and then I'm like, I know I'm not going to have time, but I'm going to watch it back or listen to it back later. So that's the beauty of technology, and hence us doing all these things more online to reach more people, to kind of break through barriers of distance, time, money, childcare, stress, all those things. So you get some little doses of information and support online without having to physically go anywhere, which is so great. And you might still be stuck where you are, wherever you are in Australia or the world. You might still be having to sort of quarantine and be very strict about what you're doing. And really that was the origins of our live streams as well. We all had to dramatically change the way we worked with clients here. We work predominantly as a mental health service, offering lots of counselling, group programs, health promotion, a few different things. So we had to switch to a lot of online stuff. Anyway, I'm sure you're probably aware of that. So today I'm going to talk about reparenting. This topic is also in the self-compassion course that we run here at Women's Health and Wellbeing Services, and that has been recorded as an online group for you to purchase. Again, you go to our website to do that, and there's about 5 modules. I recorded it, I should know, in that, and one of the topics in that is reparenting. I really love this stuff about reparenting, and what really got me, I guess, thinking a lot about it and being much more interested in it more recently, beyond what I studied, I'll talk about that briefly, was a friend, actually, not a psych friend, just a regular friend that I've known a long time, said she follows a psychologist on Instagram. She calls herself the holistic psychologist. Her name is Dr. Nicole LaPera. By all means look her up. She's fantastic. I actually contacted her to make sure I could use some of her information in her content in the self-compassion group, and she was really happy to let me share that information. So I really can't encourage you enough to go check out her stuff. She's got a website as well. She's US based. Hello to anyone in America watching this. So she talks a lot about reparenting. So some of the content is from her, but I've also got other bits and pieces. I wanted to start though with what I try to do on a topic every week, was do some research in the literature, in the scientific kind of communities, or anything out there in the psych world, in journals and peer-reviewed articles on that particular topic. I really struggled to find any information on that last week when I talked about what an empath is. And likewise, I found it a little tricky on this topic in relation to basically self-reparenting. So reparenting as a concept, I first came across doing my master's in counselling psychology a few years ago now, in that reparenting is really at the heart of most therapeutic relationships. So when you go to counselling, or therapy, I'm just going to use them interchangeably. There is a process in that which we can call reparenting. So particularly if you're going to, or if someone's going to therapy for a chunk of time, so, 1 year plus, right? You develop a therapeutic alliance, we would call, with your therapist. And actually that alliance is at the heart of change and therapeutic benefit, really. And you might know that if you've ever gone to have counselling or therapy and you haven't clicked with that person and you don't go back, hopefully don't go back, go and find someone different. It's no different to anything else in life. You can shop around and find someone who really gets you and that you feel a connection with, because it's that connection that drives change, that drives that therapeutic process. And it doesn't necessarily matter what type of therapy that therapist is doing, whether that's, CBT or existential or psychodynamic, or there's lots of different types of therapies, as long as that therapeutic relationship is good and strong, because that is your secure base. And in therapy, there is a process, sort of almost an unconscious process of reparenting. Often we go to therapy. I've certainly been to therapy myself quite a few times over the years, to relearn how to do things, or to develop things in us that were underdeveloped or sort of not given to us by our parents or our upbringing. And it's not about blame, it's about where am I at today, what's working, what's not, what's kind of missing, what is overdeveloped that I need to tone down. So reparenting is kind of a concept in a way in the therapeutic space, in that relationship. What I did find online, which in the research, which makes sense given what I was certainly taught, was reparenting is used specifically in a couple of different therapies. One is called Schema Therapy and the other is called Transactional Analysis. I think it's present as a core in some other therapies, but these were the two main ones. So I just briefly wanted to talk about them before, and how what those therapies are about, before I talk more about self-reparenting. So you don't necessarily have to go to therapy, although that can be a really, really good thing. But of course you don't have to go if you don't want to. You might not need to, or there might be some barriers there to you going, and you can learn to do some of that stuff for yourself. So Schema Therapy, this took me back a way to what Schema Therapy is. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. If anyone's watching this, you're welcome to sort of chat in the little chat box down here. So what's a schema though? So let's start with that. So a schema, and I'm going to be reading off some notes here, some book content that I found. So a schema can be thought of generally as any broad organizing principle for making sense of one's life experience. It's a very important concept generally. Many schemas are formed in early life, as we would expect. The same with any sort of beliefs and the way you learn to do things, formed in early life, and continue to be elaborated and then superimposed on later life experiences, even when they are no longer applicable. And that's really important, because we learn what we learn when we grow up. That's our training ground, our family, and that kind of home environment, or whatever environment you grew up in. And then you go out into the world with what you've learnt, or what you've come to believe or understand about people and the world and yourself. Sometimes that stuff is great, awesome, healthy, pretty cool, pretty adaptive, good enough, as we would say. Sometimes it's not. And some of the coping strategies or mechanisms that we developed early on, we use as adults, and it doesn't fit. Because obviously the outside world is different to our family environment and how we learn to be in that family environment. Then you come out and you've got to learn to be in the world environment with colleagues, with friends, with peers, in relationships and stuff like that. And sometimes that doesn't fit, and you develop some problems out there in the world. The key thing with schemas, really, and the development of the concept of a schema and schema therapy, somebody called Young, I can't remember his first name, really developed schema therapy in the 90s. But his main concept of that was early maladaptive schemas. Obviously, very important to have an understanding of them. So, a definition of early maladaptive schemas is that they are broad, pervasive, a theme or a pattern comprised of memories, emotions, cognitions, your thoughts, and bodily sensations regarding oneself and one's relationship with others, developed during childhood or adolescence, elaborated throughout one's lifetime, and dysfunctional to a significant degree. Because if they're maladaptive, they are dysfunctional. There's been a process of something's kind of screwed up in that adaptive, and they've become maladaptive, and now they're not working as an adult, okay? So that's kind of what schema is. Schema therapy then works on correcting or fixing, working through these early maladaptive schemas, and there's a whole series of different schemas, and I'm not going to go into them. So early maladaptive schemas, though, are self-defeating emotional and cognitive patterns that begin early in development and repeat throughout life. And you may have found that. I know I certainly have, when we find that we're really stuck in repeating negative patterns in our lives, and we're like, why do I keep doing this thing? Why do I keep getting in these relationships, or why do I keep falling into this this behavior that I know is not good for me? That's a clue that there's something that's being repeated and sort of being trying to correct itself in one way, but we get stuck in this because we're still using essentially old strategies. So with schema therapy, if it's working on early maladaptive schemas, early, as it's saying, developed in childhood and adolescence, and there may have been something that went wrong with the parenting or the caregiving that you received. Hence that concept of reparenting coming in there to correct what's kind of gone wrong inside of you. We all develop internalized parental figures. So whether you physically had a mother and a father, or two parents, or in your life, or you didn't, we still develop concepts of them. So there's a piece of our mother and a piece of our father, and I'm generalizing here, inside of us that sometimes still run the show. And I'm smiling because I know that I've seen that in many people. I've seen that in myself. Sometimes that can be amazing. Sometimes we're quite alarmed by that. You don't have to have a physical parent present for that to develop. It will still develop anyway. Say if your father wasn't around much, you might have formed ideas about who your father was from photos or conversations or the media, what a father is, and you've developed some internal concept of a father. And so we have these kind of parents within us running around. And so reparenting is part of schema therapy, and it's part of, So in terms of, schema therapy and the role of reparenting, it's involving limited reparenting in this therapy as meeting the core needs of that person which were not met in childhood within appropriate professional boundaries. So as I was saying before, when you enter into a therapeutic relationship, into some counselling, there is that process of reparenting. It's not often spoken about. It's not really a thing. It's just a concept and a construct that the therapist, what we would say, keeps in mind and holds in mind, and is trying to meet those some core emotional needs, or trying to work out what the maladaptive ones are, whether they're doing schema therapy per se or not. And in schema therapy too, there's some really interesting information about how they think about these. What are core emotional needs? How are they? Get off. There's a little reminder on my screen. Go away. Very distracting. Core emotional needs that every human being needs. Not rocket science. So we have the need for safety and security, nurturance, acceptance, the need for autonomy, be able to do things on your own, to have some sort of power and control in your life, the need for competence and a sense of identity, for the freedom to express your needs and emotions, for spontaneity and play, and for a world with realistic limits set, which fosters the emergence of self-control. I have talked a little bit in my other live streams about self-control, delaying gratification and concepts like that, which are involved in self-discipline and self-control. So everyone has these emotional needs, as a blanket rule, as a generalization. So we all have these needs. In some people, they're bigger needs, and in some people, they're less. So, somebody might have a higher need for acceptance, or for spontaneity and play. It's quite big in them, but other needs, less so. They still have all those needs, but there's just different in different people, of course, because no one's the same. And no one's had the same upbringing. Even children in the same family, they've all had different upbringings in a way, because their personality and their temperament is different. They're a different person, so the way they've understood that world growing up is different. So emotional needs are present from childhood, and at their strongest in childhood, of course, when we think about babies, human babies, extremely dependent on adults around them, on their primary caregiver, otherwise they die. It doesn't get any simpler than that. And so these core emotional needs ideally are met during childhood. Over the years, our parents or our main caregivers are doing their best, are doing good enough to meet all these needs. And I'm not saying you're going through a checklist there, and going, okay, I've got to meet that one and tick that one off and tick that one. No, it doesn't work like that. We're just kind of doing it. And we do it the best we can, usually the way we learnt from our parents. Or if we didn't like what we learnt, sometimes we try to do something very, very different to our parents. That's a whole different thing as well, which I might talk about in another live stream. So psychological health, this definition here, is the ability to get one's needs met in an adaptive manner, in a really healthy manner. I don't know if anyone's had all their psychological needs met in childhood. It's just the way it is. We all struggle as parents. I'm a parent. I know that struggle. Then we grow up and become adults, and we have other needs that need to be met on top of the needs that were or weren't met as a child. Then we become adults, and we have other emotional needs, the need to work, the need to have a purpose in life. And what happens when these needs aren't met? What is buzzing? There is something driving my cursor here. Just get off my phone. It's buzzing. Get you down there. What happens when they're not met? This is when we can get into problems. And for some of us, we may know that there's kind of these holes or gaps inside of us, and certain needs aren't met. We may look around us when we're adults and go, how come they seem to know what they're doing, or they're able to get into stable relationships or find work, or don't have problems with drugs or alcohol or addictions, but I struggle with that. Why is that? And I think on some level many people know that something is kind of missing or a bit malformed in their lives. So that's a little touch on schemas, schema therapy, reparenting in that concept, and these core emotional needs, really, really important. Reparenting also comes up in a type of therapy called Transactional Analysis. I'm not overly familiar with this. I haven't had any training really in Transactional Analysis. But it's what is the basis of Transactional Analysis is a personality model that is based on what they call 3 ego states: the parent, the adult, the child, and the transactions going on between these internalized states. The parent within us, the adult within us, the child within us. We can see pretty quickly how reparenting then plays a part in that, because if we're working with the internalized child within us, or the internalized parents. Remember, I did just talk about that a few minutes ago, that we all have these versions of parents within us. And if things are going wrong, essentially, between these 3 different states, well, we're having some problems, kind of thing. So with the parent, the adult, and the child, the parent ego state has behaviors, feelings, and thoughts taken from our parents or our key parental figures. The adult ego state, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that are a direct response to the here and now. So the adult is really where you are now, hopefully, as an adult, functioning in the present moment. The child ego state is behavior, thoughts, and feelings that are repeated from childhood. So again, if we start to see repeated patterns show up in our life, or that we're using old strategies or sort of things that we learned growing up and they're not fitting or not working for us as adults. There's some funky stuff going on there, and we need to work with essentially that inner child and those inner parents really that are running the show and are trying to get needs met, especially that inner child. And if that child didn't grow up in a pretty healthy, adaptive, functional environment, it still has those needs to be met, those core universal emotional needs. So those 20 minutes I just spent talking about reparenting in the context of therapy and how that shows up in a couple of main therapeutic techniques, but also just generally in therapy in general, there is a sort of instance of reparenting going on as you are learning new ways about new things about yourself. You're having more understanding about yourself. You're able to start to learn to meet some more emotional needs that you were struggling to meet before, because the therapist is supporting you in that and helping you develop some insight, and is actually meeting some of those emotional needs or meeting something in you that is missing. And over time, what happens is you internalize that the same way you internalize those experiences that you learned growing up. Good therapy will internalize aspects of the therapist or and the therapeutic process, so that you're able to go, wait, is this good for me? If I'm out in the world and I'm doing something, you might have more awareness, and you might suddenly be able to tap into a part of yourself that is able to go, wait, what's happening here? What would my therapist say? Kind of thing, So in regards to self-reparenting, which is kind of the main gist of what I wanted to talk about today, it is what it sounds like: learning to parent yourself. And as I've said, and I'll keep saying, makes sense, because if we've missed out on some things growing up because our parents were struggling in some way because of the way they were parented and the way our grandparents were parented and so on and so on and so on, we have to learn to do some things for ourselves. And I won't lie, it's often harder as an adult, and the longer you leave it and the more patterns and dysfunction kind of goes on over time, the more entrenched it can get. It's not that it can't change, it can be just a little more intense and can take longer, because what we're actually really doing is rewiring the brain. So we're really well aware now, there's lots of research in the neuroscience field that what fires together wires together, because in the brain with the synapses, there's literally little bits of electricity. Our brains are full of that, and messages going, chemical messages as well, neurotransmitters going between the little neurons in the brain. So obviously if you're doing the same thing over and over and over, if you're thinking the same thing over and over and over, doing the same things over and over, you're literally burning those pathways in your brain. Okay, maybe not burning, because then you would have no brain cells left, but you're just building pathways, whoop, and they become stronger and stronger and stronger. And that can be why it's really hard, to change, to break a habit, because your brain is automatically wanting to go down that path that it's always gone down. And if you think about that in terms of water, water going down a stream and then suddenly it forks off because it's formed a groove in the path there, and it's, or walking in the bush, you follow a path that's already there. Why wouldn't you? If you want to go down a different path, you're going to actually have to take a machete and hack your way through the bush to find a new path. And when you come back, so you've gone for a bushwalk and you're like, I want to go a different way. So you create a new path, but it's nothing like the new path, because the new path is smooth, it's easy, it's not overgrown, you don't have to fight your way through. And you come back for another bushwalk the next week and you're like, maybe I'll just go through that same path again because it's really easy. Or should I go through that path that I've just created and I know it needs me to keep going on that path to form the new path, kind of thing. Yes, you should go down that new path, even though it is, just think about that visually, it is going to be harder for the first few hundred times, kind of thing, until that becomes the default path, essentially, that the brain is going down. It's now, we do this one. you're always probably going to default back to the old path or the old way of doing things because you're a human being, because that path has been long established, because sometimes we get tired, we get fatigued, we get overwhelmed, we're like, I'm just going to do that thing. I'm just going to pick up that drug or that packet of Tim Tams or fall into that bad relationship again because it's what I know. Sometimes we do that. It's okay to do that as long as we're able to go, okay, no, wait, I'm trying to change this here. I'm trying to look after myself in a better way, which we can say is a version of reparenting. What am I trying to do differently here? And acknowledge the challenge in that, because it is harder creating new pathways in our lives, let alone in our brains. So reparenting, learning to parent yourself. Be the person you needed to be when you were younger. Think about that. On that note too, if any of this content today is interesting, or you're thinking, I want to go more into this, get a pen and paper, write down some of the things I'm talking about, journal about some of this stuff, develop some insights, maybe trot off to therapy too. Signs that you need to do reparenting. So this is content from that holistic psychologist, Dr. Nicole in America. This is her list here, which I just love. So signs you need to do reparenting. You struggle with holding and keeping boundaries. Boundaries. I have live streamed about this before. It's content in our groups as well. Really big issues that come up in therapy for many, many people around boundaries. So if you struggle to hold boundaries, keep boundaries, that may be a sign that you need to do some reparenting. Another sign may be that you notice unhealthy patterns in your relationships. Another sign, you feel lost and without passion or purpose. Another one, you make life decisions to please or impress or get love from a parent or from, I would say, a significant other. Your inner narrative, your inner voice is very critical. You're often judgmental and critical of others. So perhaps you're projecting some of that inner criticism onto others. Another sign here, you change core parts of self depending on who you're around. Does that sound familiar to anyone? You're a bit of a chameleon. You kind of adapt to who's around you. Oh, that person's like that, so I'll kind of change the way I am. Sometimes we do that a little bit, but if that's kind of the core way you operate, it's certainly a sign you need to do some work on yourself and some reparenting. Another sign, you make promises to yourself and you don't follow through with them, and you distrust the intentions of others. That's from her Instagram page. A really good list there. And if we're thinking about, if I'm to overlay them, right, with universal core emotional needs that I talked about before when I was talking a bit about schemas and schema therapy. Okay, so boundaries comes up there. I mentioned before, a core emotional need is for a world with realistic limits, which fosters the emergence of self-control. So we need to grow up in an environment which is not too strict, but not too all over the place, so that we develop healthy boundaries. Because if that's been taught to us, and by taught I mean done, physically done. You can talk till the cows come home, and your parent can talk to you till the cows come home. But if they're not doing it, if they're not putting limits in place for you as a child, like, son, you need to go to bed at 8 o'clock, and bam, 8 o'clock you're in bed. Or usually there's a bit of a, you have 15 minutes, when that's kind of, not in place and not practiced enough day in, day out to burn the little pathways in the brain and develop that. That is an internal emotional need that we have to develop self-control and self-discipline. So you can see if that's not present or not met enough, we have troubles with that as an adult. We struggle with self-discipline. We can't keep promises to ourselves. We try, but we almost like we don't have, if that was not given or shown or developed in you, you're coming from nothing, hence coming into counselling. Sometimes you've got to start right back at the beginning. You've got to get back to basics. We're trying to develop and build up a skill in yourself to develop and practice something like self-control, to develop some discipline for yourself, to learn to delay gratification. Another example here is the boundaries one, which I talked about. So if we talk about the realistic limits, again, boundaries are a huge part of that. And in many families, unfortunately, there's just boundary crossing all over the place. There's enmeshments and cut-offs and all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on. There's intrusions and people getting involved in other people's stuff, and it's not their stuff to get involved in. Very, very common. Not great though. And it can be very, if you've grown up in that environment, you probably find it hard to say no to people, or if there's very, very strict boundaries in your family, then you might be very rigid around your boundaries as well as an adult, and not be able to kind of move or flex with them as we need to as adults. Unhealthy, going back to the signs that you need to do reparenting. If you notice unhealthy patterns in your relationships, there has probably been some dysfunctional relationships in your family growing up, lost and without passion or purpose, because a core emotional need is to develop a sense of identity. So if you grow up in a family where your parents or main caregivers, whoever was around you, had an addiction or had major mental health issues or was very absent, or there was something going on that really took the attention, I'm just going to say that, it's just easy to say, took the attention away from you, or you had to focus a lot on what was happening in them because they were a little bit chaotic, or they were absent, or whatever. There was something going on in some of your parents, and you were not given the kind of the space and the growth and the support and the nurturance, because they're core emotional needs as a child, and you're busy focusing on the world around you, or say you've got to look after a lot of your siblings growing up, or you've got to parent yourself. If you're parentified, that's what we would call that, when a child is essentially doing the parenting in a family. They're parentified. How were you able to develop a sense of self, a sense of purpose, find out who you are, find out what you like, find out what you want to do in the world, let alone for that to be nurtured and supported as you grow up? So if you didn't have that, if you were kind of busy trying to manage the chaos in your family, or running away from the family because of stuff, or having to look after people in your family, you weren't able to grow and develop parts of yourself. So you kind of grow up a bit lost, kind of bouncing all over the place, not quite knowing what you want to do, or you're kind of doing things which you did as a child. To say you were like a parentified child and you took care of a lot of family members, you might then grow up and go into a caring role. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But the question is, what would you have chosen if you didn't have that as your little training ground in childhood? Is that really at the heart of you? Or maybe you want to go and be like a, artist who works in textiles. I'm just saying. So they were the signs you need to do reparenting, which give us a lot of hints and clues about what was not met internally with those core emotional needs. How to access your inner parent. So if we think about what I briefly mentioned with transactional analysis, you can Google that and you can see they actually have that in 3 circles: the parent, the adult, and the child. The little transactions that go on between them internally. All this stuff is very internal and often very, very unconscious, unless you bring it to consciousness, like in counselling or just doing some work on yourself. How to access your inner parent, and to start to parent yourself and start to adult yourself, to actually be an adult. Keep this is from the holistic psychologist, thank you. Keep one small promise to yourself every single day. So that is starting to build some self-control and some self-discipline. And note that she says small. So, you're not going to go for every day I'm going to go for that 5 or 10K run. Like, be realistic. Even if you are a runner and you train, really, I don't think it's good to go running that much anyway. But, what would I know? But small little promises that you can build on every day. And if you think about yourself as a child, or that little inner person that still is in you somewhere, what would be a realistic little goal for that little person to set every day? So if you're really having struggles adulting and taking care of yourself, you might struggle to say, or if you've got some mental health issues, it might be a challenge for you to have a shower every day, or to just have one healthy meal a day. Everything else can be whatever, just starting small. Or something like, I'm just going to go for a little walk around the block every day, or I'm going to go outside once a day, just get some fresh air, tune into nature. Might be something like I'm going to brush my teeth twice a day, so these are really small, really, really small things. Or if you want to do something a little bit more, I don't know, adult, I suppose is a word, I'm not sure what the word is. You could journal every day, but just keep it short, just small. Just a page. Page doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be A4. So keep one small promise to yourself every day. So you're starting to build something within yourself. Do something you love just for you. So this is another way to access that inner parent, to parent yourself. Regardless of how silly or pointless it seems to others, do something you love just for you. This reminds me of a book I read a year or so ago called The Artist's Way, which is about developing and building your creativity. And she's huge, that book by Julia Cameron, I think. I can't remember. She talks a lot. Creativity and the inner child just go hand in hand, And so doing something for yourself every day, or maybe every few days, you want to start small, that you love just for you. So I'm going to be honest here. I really love fairy bread, okay? If you're not in Australia, you probably don't know what that is. It's white bread with butter and you sprinkle on top hundreds and thousands. It's at every child's party you go to in this country. It's so great. And sometimes I will want to eat that, to be honest. I don't know, if I'm really struggling, if I've had a difficult day or I'm quite emotional, I know it's not the healthiest. If I was to eat a whole loaf of that, not great. But to me, there is like a distinct, if I'm thinking that, it's like that inner child in me is kind of wanting what that represents and what, so I'm kind of doing something a little silly and a little fun that kind of reminds me of parties, reminds me of being a child kind of thing. And that parent in me is like, you know what, I'm going to say yes. Let's have that fairy bread, woo, kind of thing. Who cares what other people think? I mean, I'm confessing that now. My partner and my son are well aware of that kind of thing. Nobody else has to know, though. It's just something for you, okay? Another way to access your inner parent, when you have thoughts of self-doubt, remind yourself that thoughts are habitual neural responses and not the truth, okay? What she's meaning there is what I've been talking about. The pathways in our brains, the neurons in our brains that have just learnt to fire together and wire together and form those pathways over time. Thoughts are as powerful as we let them. So, because what is a thought really? It's not something that you can physically grab. I can grab my hair, I can grab my earrings or whatever kind of thing. Thoughts, as you know, they exist up here. If we learn to develop some skills in just going, I can notice what I'm thinking, but I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to say fuse with it, which is a concept in a different type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. It might be worthwhile to talk about different therapies one of these live streams. If we're able to just kind of see our thoughts for what they are. So when that self-doubt and say that criticism, that inner criticism comes in, we can go, you know what, this is that story again that I tell myself and I just kind of want to beat myself up. Am I going to believe it, or am I just going to watch it float out of my head as well? That does take practice, but it's totally possible. Embrace, another way to access your inner parent, embrace discipline as self-love and the basis of self-care. This is a big one, and I have talked about this before, self-discipline and self-control, and learning to basically delay gratification, which is a very important life skill. If you want to basically create a future for yourself, delaying gratification is involved, say, in saving money. So instead of buying, that little trinket that you want to get now, that new pair of shoes or whatever, some new fishing gear, something like that, if you're able to delay that gratification, I just want it now, and put that money aside, and you keep doing that, or create a savings plan for yourself, you're building something for your future self as well. Same kind of concept in many behavior, like dieting and something like that, is delaying gratification to eat something now because you want something in the long term. Quite a mature adult behavior to engage in. So when you're able to do that and start small again, which is very similar to the keeping the promise to yourself, but embracing discipline as a good thing, and not this strict, harsh, punishing discipline. That's exactly not what I mean, and not something that's really weak and kind of collapses right when you need to like hold a boundary or hold a promise to yourself. Because if you think about, say, a parent with a child, and the child is at a party, let's talk about kids' parties, yay, and the child wants to eat like way too much sugary stuff, and the parent is saying to the child, and this was to happen at every party, say to the child, you can have a little plate of things there, and that's okay, but then that's it. And of course, if you're able to do that over time, that child would learn limits and then would learn to discipline themselves. And ideally, then when they become teenagers and adults, they can eat some crap, but then they can balance that up with some healthy food too, because they know that feels better and they know that's a good thing to do for themselves. So they're kind of learning to parent themselves. Another way to access your inner parent is to acknowledge your small victories. For example, cooking a meal at home, going to bed early. That's a really good one. Acknowledge small victories. Really, really important. The going to bed early thing, I think that's a really good thing in terms of keeping a promise to yourself every day. I know I'm shocking with this too, and it's still a work in progress, believe me. I'm in my 40s and I'm like, oh, really? I still want to start too late, sit on my phone or whatever. But again, starting kind of low with the bar and building up on that, and not being too strict with yourself. Like, I'm going to go to bed at 9 o'clock every night. Boom. And if you've been going to bed at 11 or 12 for years, suddenly thinking and believing that you can jump to 9 o'clock and that'd be fine is really unrealistic, and you're going to set yourself up for failure. In an example like that, you would want to start going to bed half an hour earlier, and then you might only find you can do that 2 or 3 times a week. And the important thing is to go, I'm still doing it, I'm working towards that, it's better than nothing, and slowly working on it like that. Little kind of steps. Think about it, as a parent would with a young child. We wouldn't expect a young child to be able to regulate themselves and be able to go to bed on time and not eat ice cream at midnight and stuff like that. We teach our children, ideally, the healthy kind of parent teaches their child these limits and these boundaries and these rules and structure, and then that develops in that child. So then they don't need to do a lot of reparenting, because they already parent themselves pretty well when they're an adult, because these things have been done for us as a child and done repeatedly. It's the day in, day out, month after month, year after year, that helps grow and develop these core concepts and behaviors and beliefs within us. Okay, there's some other content I found. Where are you? Ways to reparent yourself. I found this on a blog, and also the Psychology Today website, learning to parent yourself as an adult. There's some really cool stuff here. Why didn't I highlight it? She's talking about boundaries. So this is an article from Psychology Today, Learning to Parent Yourself as an Adult, by, who is she? I think an American therapist. Really good content here. So she's talking about helpful self-parenting tips. Fall in love with boundaries. Like I said, boundaries. So important. And I am going to say sometimes particularly difficult for women. I think as women, we are particularly prone to overly caring for others, ignoring our own needs, sacrificing ourselves, people pleasing, struggling to say no, struggling to be assertive, struggling to ask for what we want. So all of this is representative of some funky, holy boundaries or barriers, that we're unable to set for ourselves, and too much comes in and too much of us goes out and we're exhausted or we're sick, kind of thing. So boundaries. And the sooner you're able to start working on this stuff, the better. Like I said, it can be a bit more challenging the older you get, but it's absolutely still possible to change. The brain is very plastic. There's that concept of neuroplasticity. We are able to change the brain and build new pathways, but of course it's just a little harder takes a little longer as an adult because stuff has already been laid down as I mentioned before. Another self-parenting tip, take care of yourself. So this is very similar to what the holistic psychologist was saying, small victories, keep one little small promise to yourself, and it's kind of doing some healthy, cool, funky stuff for yourself every day. And you've got to really, I think, be realistic about that and manage that well. In terms of doing something, what does she say? Doing something before, something that you love every day. And I'm not saying you should go out and eat fairy bread or honey joys, chocolate crackles. I never like them as much every day. It's probably not healthy to do that, but something that you love, every day, that is taking care of yourself. So, like I said, whether that's going to bed early, eating breakfast if you don't typically eat breakfast, anything, I probably should, eating a bit more fruit in your day, doing a little bit of exercise, all this kind of, I'm going to say, boring stuff. Bloody boring. Oh, I've got to exercise, I've got to eat healthy. It reminds me of that ad. There used to be an ad here in Australia a few years ago for some frozen meals, right? Healthy frozen meals. But the premise of the ad was the parent ringing the adult child to go, are you taking care of yourself? Then the adult child was like, yes, Mum, I'm taking care of myself. That's what it's about. I mean, the parent there is still looking after their child, even though they're an adult, as you would. You never stop kind of worrying and caring for your child, no matter how old they are. But for the adult child to say, yes, I'm taking care of myself, whether that's eating a frozen meal or maybe cooking something fresh, going out for something healthy, that is taking care of yourself. So reparenting is taking care of yourself in a really nourishing and nurturing way, which may be a foreign concept to some people out there. If you have not had a lot of love, a lot of nurturance, a lot of acceptance of who you are just for you, not based on what you do or how well you've achieved or grades or anything like that, just because you're you and you're awesome and you're delighted in for being awesome. If you haven't had those experiences and or you've had experiences which are abusive, traumatic, very toxic, these kinds of concepts may be like, what the hell? That is very hard for me. Hence, you've got to start quite small with those little kind of victories of taking care of yourself. What else does she say? Work out your calm plan and your relaxation ritual. This is really good to have a toolkit, like a little mini well-being toolkit for when you get in distress or when things become really overwhelming for you. Particularly good if you struggle with some mental health issues and you need to have a little toolkit for noticing when you get triggered or when you're starting to slide. What's it called? There's a name for these little kind of self-care toolkits. You could physically have a little toolkit, but it's more about having a list of things. What helps me when I'm feeling bad or when I'm feeling really stressed or when I'm really overwhelmed? What helps me that is good and healthy and nurturing? Because that's what a good and healthy and nurturing parent would do for a child who's in distress. Ideally, you wouldn't yell at that child. You wouldn't punish that child. You wouldn't starve that child or force it to eat crap or feed it drugs kind of thing or neglect it. You do something good for that child to support them through that emotion. And it's the same thing we want to be doing to ourselves and for ourselves as adults. Another tip here, allow yourself to experience vulnerability, dependency, and other emotional states. By dependency, I don't mean like codependency or anything like that. That's not what she's meaning. But it's learning to form a sort of a healthy dependence, perhaps on friends or people around you. Again, being vulnerable and stuff like that may be very difficult for some people who've had to really form some very tough aspects of themselves to protect themselves. It can be very hard to let someone in if you've had a very, say, traumatic upbringing and you've had to kind of toughen up and you kind of have this kind of brutish approach to life. To learn to be vulnerable can be pretty scary. It might take months or years to do that. Whether you start doing that, in some sort of therapeutic realm, usually a good way to start that, because that's a professional. You're in a private, confidential space that ideally is safe and secure for you, and you can learn to start opening up parts of yourself and allow yourself to be seen and heard, and all your feelings acknowledged and validated. And over time, this is what you want to be doing for yourself, because that is good. Reparenting, being able to nurture yourself and listen to your feelings and your body and support it as best you can. Another strategy here, keep the adult tantrums to a minimum. It's kind of amusing. We think we can all tantrum a little bit kind of thing. But if somebody tantrums a lot and they're an adult, there's probably some stuff going on there for them that they haven't worked through, or they haven't got support for. The point with, like, say, having a tantrum or just saying, really getting upset or really losing your shit or losing your cool, perhaps in inappropriate ways, and you're not able to regulate yourself well, you're not able to sort of emotionally regulate yourself, you're not able to tolerate distress. I have live streamed on this before. You're not able to recognize warning signs and triggers. You're just at the mercy of everything else out there in the world, and you probably are going to have tantrums and get into a lot of conflict with other people because something is a little bit missing in you, kind of thing, and was not kind of supported or formed growing up. So that's kind of an indicator of, there's something kind of going wrong here, and I need to develop some new skills around that. Because as adults, and if we're parenting ourselves well, we can tell when we're getting upset. We can tell when we're getting, say, triggered, or that there's warning signs going on, and so if you are able to detect that within yourself, you know what to do. The same way, I'm going to say it again, the same way a healthy parent can see that in their child. When their child starts to tantrum a lot or is losing their cool, shouldn't swear too much, depending on the age of the child, obviously, the parent is able to see that and respond to that emotional need fairly quickly and fairly well. That's good enough, kind of thing. So they're able to go, oh, I think they're getting a little tired, or they're a little overwhelmed. Some kids are very susceptible to overwhelm and too much stimulation, and they start to bounce off the wall. So the parent is essentially, by attending to that child's needs over and over again, that child over and over again, through that process of time, learns to detect that in themselves. However, if you haven't had that experience growing up, you don't know what to detect. Suddenly you're just a ball of rage, or a ball of distress, or you're a ball in the corner crying, kind of thing. And you're having to learn what is going on in me, and to learn when things are starting to boil up inside of you, and then learn to parent yourself, to go, hey Mel, I don't think you're going well here. I think you need to take care of yourself, or perhaps you need to leave this situation, or whatever, kind of thing. And you do that. You follow through with that. And that is good self-care, and that's good self-parenting, reparenting. She's saying here, another tip for good self-reparenting: never underestimate the healing powers of a good night's rest, a daytime nap, yoga, lots of water, healthy eating, quality chocolate, all these kinds of things. Absolutely. I think on the flip side of not taking care of yourself is, the flip side, say there's not taking care of yourself as in, like, not eating well, not sharing much, or falling into addictions, the scourge of busyness and doing all these things is equally a version of not taking care of yourself. You might look like you're adulting, and you might do a lot of stuff because you trying to tell yourself, I've got it, I'm adulting, I know what I'm doing, and I have to fill myself with all these things, I have to fill the day with all these things. Really, what's that about? There's a franticness about that, and that's not taking care of yourself. That's not giving yourself time to rest and digest. So we have the system that, the fight or flight system that fires us up, that gets us going, that, activates us in the world, that responds to stress. We need to balance that with rest and downtime, good sleep, napping if you want, without excessive napping. Remember, it's part of that balance. All very healing and very nourishing and very nurturing. That's what it comes down to. Nourishing and nurturing activities for yourself. Learning to self-soothe. This is a really, really big one. Self-soothe in a healthy, nourishing and nurturing way. So I don't mean self-soothing with a tub of ice cream, drinking a bottle of wine, working yourself to the bone, taking care of others. It's not self-soothing. Being excessively distracted, when you're able to self-soothe in a healthy way, like I said, where you're able to go, I'm getting a bit overwhelmed, I'm getting really stressed, I'm really struggling here. If you're having those thoughts, great, you need to listen to those thoughts and go, I need to do something. What can I do that is kind to myself? Does that mean just shutting the door and taking a mental health day, staying in bed, watching TV, watching Netflix all day, bake myself a cake, pat my pets. Pets are a huge source, I think, of love, unconditional love, and really good relaxation. They actually can affect your blood pressure. I'm just thinking of patting my cat, how calming that is. Learning to soothe yourself, again, as a parent, would soothe a distressed child as best I can, kind of thing, to support them. And when that's done over and over again, that child learns to do that for themselves. So all these things I'm talking about are the things that ideally a pretty healthy, functional parent would have done for their child. And then that's internalized, and that internalized mother or father within them is doing all these good things automatically and saying some good things to you, kind of thing, because that's within you already. Of course, the opposite of that is when it's missing from you, or it's very harsh and very critical. Oh, you don't need to rest, or suck it up, princess, toughen up, all this kinds of stuff. It's a very harsh, punishing, obviously, very critical kind of parent that may exist within you that is running the show, and that's not a really healthy strategy, and that's not parenting yourself or reparenting yourself. That's punishing yourself. And the final thing here is about learning to see the world as a safe place where most people possess goodwill. So I'm just thinking about that, because I think if you've come from a background of a lot of trauma and abuse, you probably think the world is not safe. It's just not safe. It wasn't safe for me growing up. Why would I think it's safe for me as an adult? And then you may find you're stuck in repeating patterns or addictions or toxic relationships that re-traumatize you and reinforce, really, that the world is not safe. And you can't be vulnerable, and you can't look after yourself and all this kind of stuff. That's where you would definitely need to come in see someone for some counselling and really good support. And again, if those core emotional needs weren't met, particularly safety and stability, if you were removed from your family home, if you were in foster care, or if you were abused in some way, your sense of safety would probably be right out the window. And if we think about even Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that triangle with the needs, and at the bottom is the need, safety and security. We need the roof over our head, we need food and water, and we need to feel shelter. At the bottom, and we need to feel safe and secure in the world. If we don't have those basic core needs, and if you've come from a particularly difficult childhood, you might have moved around a lot, there might have been homelessness, drug addicted parents, people coming in and out all the time, possible abuse, might have witnessed some horrible things. Whew. How are you supposed to adult in the world in a healthy, functional way? How are you reparenting? You're probably not parenting yourself well at all. And I know that's a very, very difficult place to be. There are things you can do. You can start to do these little gentle things for yourself every day to learn to reparent yourself, to reparent that child that went through all these things, no matter how extreme or not that extreme, even if things were pretty good, but there was just a couple of things missing. You need to start to learn to look after yourself today and do those things for yourself to parent yourself well today. I'm just mindful of the time, and I've been talking for nearly an hour. I need a drink of water. I wanted to finish up. I don't actually have the book because I gave the book back to the friend who lent it to me, but I read this amazing book a few months ago. Let me hold it up here. Called The Prettiest Horse in the Glue Factory. I hope you can see that there. By Corey White. It's a memoir. He's an Australian... Did I hold it up enough? I'm just looking back to the replay. Like this. Here we go. So he's an Australian. Yay! Australian man. I think he's only around 30. Sorry, Corey, if you're watching this. I highly doubt you're watching this. But this is a memoir of his life. He's a comedian. And he became quite famous as a comedian when he essentially did his story as the comedic act, and then he's written his life history. I won't lie, it's really confronting stuff. You know, I'm a therapist, and I found it like, wow, it's some pretty heavy duty stuff. So Corey's parents were unfortunately very messed up and quite dysfunctional, and he witnessed some very terrible things. Then he was in foster care, which was very horrific for him. Some things really went wrong there. Anyway, he journeys his life and what happens after that, okay? So he fell into drug and alcohol use, the whole thing. The point was, though, what I found just amazing in Corey's story, at the end of the book, he talks about essentially recovery and healing. And what he's talking about, without actually saying it, is reparenting. He started to think about the little boy in him who went through all that trauma and abuse and neglect and all this stuff. And he recognized that that little boy was still in him. And what he needed to do was look after that little boy now, in the now, to be that adult now, to parent himself and parent that child within him. And that's what he started to do. So he started to listen to his inner child, really, inner self, inner little person, inner Corey, and attend to those needs. And we're talking about, you know, needs of a child. So if you think about a child running the show, you know, there are going to be those tantrums, those that not coping, all, you know, the fear, all these things. He started to talk to himself, talk to that the child within himself, and did that religiously. And it sounds like he just started to do this. He's a very bright guy. He academically was very good, which I think is very fortunate for him. But at some point he just was able to recognize this. So actually a really good example of kind of accidental reparenting and really, you know, tapping into what was neglected in him and what still needed nurturing support. And he needed to parent that boy within him that wasn't parented when he was actually a child. Really, really good book to read, a kind of good example of doing that, but also of hope. You know, I think it's a really, like I said, it's a very confronting book, and it's, you know, quite traumatizing to not traumatize. He's gone through a lot of trauma, but it offers a lot of hope and inspiration of sort of recovery and healing in that kind of process, which is never linear. You know, no one ever changes a behavior or their life just in a straight line. It's very up and down, you know, and I think he's very honest about that as well. But it's a fabulous book. The prettiest the prettiest horse in the glue factory. I'm not even saying it right. Can't recommend that enough for a really good example of reparenting. Of, you know, basically self-care. I forgot to mention too, just to finish up, in terms of reparenting that inner child, given I was just talking about what he was doing with himself in the book, talking to that child, but bringing out your inner child. So, you know, like the holistic psychologist Nicole was saying, do something that you love every day, no matter how silly or no matter what anyone thinks. You know, getting in touch with stuff that is, you want to play with Lego, you want to go to the park and swing on the swing, do it. Do those things that nurture that little child within you, as well as supporting that child to be healthy and happy, to have some limits and some boundaries and some structure around that. So getting in touch with your inner child, you know, is perhaps getting in touch with aspects of play, of spontaneity, those core universal emotional needs, anything that's creative and fun, or you're curious about. Children are so naturally curious. So, you know, just having a little party for yourself and having kids party food, that's something I would probably do. You know, anything fun like that kind of gets you in touch with that, and maybe you didn't have those experiences. So trying to do something fun and light for yourself as well, to play with that inner child, that part of yourself as well, and parent and support it in that kind of way as well. So there's quite a few different ways, but to look after yourself, really. Reparenting, self-reparenting is all about just good self-care at the end of the day. Really be mindful of your thoughts, what you're telling yourself, any criticisms you may be falling into, as well as the behaviours. Watch all that. That will give you clues as to how you're parenting yourself or not. Anyway, I've talked for over an hour. I hope that has been of use to anyone out there. There is a lot more information online about reparenting. This video will be available on our Facebook page still, and on our YouTube page as well. By all means, read that book. It's a great book. Hop onto the Holistic Psychologist, see some of her stuff as well. Just do some general Googling, but you're never too old. It's never too late to start parenting yourself, to start looking after yourself. You are worth it. You're the most important person in your life. And you can create new patterns and new habits for yourself. Absolutely don't give up is the message I would say there. It's going to be a bit up and down for a while if you're trying to change anything. If you have any ideas for future live streams, by all means send us a message on Facebook or on our website www.whws.org.au, or you can email us info@whws.org.au. Call us if you're in Perth, 9490-2258. Happy to do some research and hunt around for more topics. Next week I'm talking about the birth of the mother, about motherhood and becoming a mother, and some of the challenges, some of the amazing stuff, but also some of the challenges that come up, particularly mental health issues that come up with when you become a mother, but more around identity change and stuff like that. I will be talking about that next week. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Take care, and take care of yourself. Bye.